Number 6 in your textbook asks you to solve an equation algebraically. Now this really shouldn't be anything new. We kind of covered this in chapter P in the prereqs, but they want us to solve 6x cubed is equal to 11x squared plus 10x. Well, for polynomials, anything larger than x, well, this would work for any equation that has x in it. We could always use what we call the zero property. Now, the zero property is nice, and it works the same every time for solving equations. So to solve an equation using the zero property, the first thing you do is set equal to 0. Okay? So what you want is you want like a bunch of stuff on one side of the equation equals 0 on the other side. Then part 2 is you're going to factor the stuff. And when I say factor stuff, there's a fancy math word we use. It's called prime factorization. Factor till you can't factor anymore. Okay? Then step 3 is pretty simple too. What you would do is set each factor equal to 0. Okay? So the first step, what do I got to do? Set it equal to 0. So I'm going to minus 11x here, 11x squared, and minus 10x here. Whatever I do on one side, I've got to do to the other. Now, can I subtract that 11x squared from the 6x cubed? No, they're not like terms. They have x's, but they're completely different, right? So this is 6x cubed minus 11x squared minus 10x is equal to 0. So, done with that one. Next, I need to factor some stuff. Whenever we go to factor something, we look at all the terms and see if there's something we could pull out. We could pull out an x, right? Somebody said x. So if I pull out an x, I get 6x squared minus 11x minus 10 is equal to 0. Okay. So maybe we could factor the quadratic. I want to look to see if there's something else I could factor out. I know that 6 and 10 are even, so maybe I could factor out a 2, but then I have 11, which is a prime number. So the only thing that goes into 11 is 1 and 11. That doesn't help. So I need to figure out what two terms I multiply to get this quadratic, if it is possible to do it that way. So I'm going to write it out over here. And I'm going to put the first term here, x squared, and then negative 10 here. Now as I look at this, what I want to do is I want to think of two numbers that I can multiply to get 6x squared. So when I look at that, what are two numbers that I can multiply to get 6x squared? Actually, two terms. I shouldn't say numbers. I should say terms. Anybody want to? It could be 3x times 2x, or it could be 6x times 1x, right? Now, what about 10? 2 and 5, or 10 and 1. So as I think about these numbers, here's what I need to think about. When I put these numbers in place, after I multiply everything out in the grid, and I add the two diagonals I just circled in orange, they have to add up to negative 11. Now you could do this with guess and check, and it's kind of easy in most cases. But what could we do to kind of give us a little bit of a head start on that? Or do you just want to guess and check? Let's guess and check. So let's do 2x times 3x All right, so if I put the 2 here, oh, by the way, because it's negative 10, one of them has to be a positive. If I put a 2 here, I'll get 4x in this box, right? If I put the 5 here, because I put the 2 here, I'll get 3 times 5, which is 15x. So I have 15x, and I'll have 4x here. Can we combine those to get a negative 11x? Yeah, I see some heads shaking, yes. So this is 15x, this is 11x. Or no, 4x. I'm getting ahead of myself. 4x. Now, one of these, the 5 or the 2, has to be negative. Which one? The 5. And by doing so, that gives me a negative 15. Then when I add those up, I get negative 11. So what we've done is we've determined that 2x minus 5 times the quantity 3x plus 2 is the same as all this stuff here, and we set it equal to 0. Now this is why this is called the zero property. We don't know, we're not sure what x is. The only thing we know is that this factor and this factor and this factor, when I multiply them all together, I get 0. How can I guarantee that? Well, what you should be thinking in your head is 0 times 0 times 0 equals 0, doesn't it? So what does that mean? That means I have to set this term equal to 0, this term equal to 0, and this term equal to 0. Because if I can figure out what values for x will make this equal 0, what value for x makes this equal 0, or what value for this makes this equal 0, then it'll be 0. In fact, if only one of these 3 is equal to 0, won't the whole thing equal 0? Yeah? Only one of these has to be equal to 0 to make the whole thing equal 0. So let's solve. Well, I've got the first one, x equals 0. The next one is going to be x is equal to 5 over 2. And then the next one is going to be x is equal to negative 2/3. Is that right? Check the book. Yep. Now how could I verify that? We did a lot of math. We think we did it correctly. How could I verify that? Plug it into the calculator. So what I could do here is I could graph my calculator. I could graph this function and see what it does on the calculator. So I'm going to clear a bunch of stuff out. I'm going to turn my stats off, stat plots. If you come down to 4, see how it says plots off? That turns off all the plots. And so I'm going to graph 6x cubed minus 11x squared minus 10x. Right? So I'm going to plug in the left hand side of the equal sign, and then the right hand side of the equal sign is 0, right? So I want to see where that crosses the 0 or x-axis. So let's graph it. Oh, got to zoom out, it's a little big. Zoom standard might help us. There it is. So what we're looking for is where it crosses the x-axis. So I've got some numbers here, I'm going to plug them in. When x equals 0, y equals 0. When x equals negative 2 divided by 3, y equals 0. When x equals 5 divided by 2, y equals 0. Ta-da!